If you think you know where this story is going, think again. A fallen Navy SEAL, a combat dog refusing to leave his side, a rookie nurse ignored by everyone in the room. What begins as a terrifying hospital standoff turns into a revelation about love, loyalty, survival, and the kind of bond death itself cannot break. This is the kind of opening that grabs attention fast, builds suspense hard, and keeps viewers emotionally locked in.
The trauma center declared a code black, but the emergency was not for the patient. It was for the devoted protector refusing to leave his side. For 6 hours, a military dog named Baron held a state-of-the-art trauma room hostage. He guarded his fallen Navy SEAL partner, challenging anyone who dared come close. Snipers had their rifles aimed, awaiting the order to fire. Then a quiet, 23-year-old nurse did the unthinkable. She entered the standoff with nothing but her bare arm extended. Her only shield was a tattoo, not a gun. What followed left everyone in the room stunned. This one incident would change the hospital forever. It is a true story about a connection so powerful that not even death could break it. The alert reached Centara Norfolk General Hospital at 2 in the morning, shattering the calm. A chopper was 5 minutes away with 2 victims, one clinging to life, the other gone. The dispatcher added a warning. A distressed dog was also on the helicopter. Chief Surgeon Dr. Alistair Sterling woke from a quick rest and pulled on his gloves. He saw medicine as a race against time. He despised surprises, especially a dog in his trauma bay. "Distressed?" Sterling questioned Brenda, the head nurse, her eyes fixed on the monitors. "What is a dog doing on that chopper? If its handler is gone, it should be kennelled," Brenda answered nervously. "They were not able to, doctor." The pilot said the dog got loose right after his handler died. "The dog is loose in the helicopter," she added. Sterling cursed quietly. "Fine. Have security meet them on the roof with a stun gun. Get the body to Bay 1 and handle that dog in 60 seconds. But this night would not obey the doctor's commands. As the helicopter landed, its blades whipped the rain into a frenzy. Medics ran towards the aircraft, protecting their faces from the fierce wind. The door slid open, revealing the sad end to a mission far from home. On the stretcher lay Master Chief Dalton Ghost Rivers, a famed Special Forces operator. His entire service record was classified, showing only a single black bar. But right now he was just a fallen soldier under a sheet, his final fight over, and lying on his chest was Baron. Baron was 80 pounds of solid muscle, a Belgian Malinois with dark brown fur. A black mask covered his face, concealing all but his intense eyes. And those eyes burned with a loyal, protective flame. A large paramedic named Rick reached for the gurney. Baron did not lunge or snap. Instead, a deep rumble vibrated through the floor of the chopper. He flashed a set of titanium teeth built for battle. "Whoa! Stay back!" Rick shouted, yanking his hands away. The flight medic yelled over the rotors. "We cannot get to him. The dog is blocking the chief. He views us as a danger." Security staff in yellow vests appeared with catch poles and tasers. "Do not," the medic warned, raising a hand. "That is an elite military combat dog. He will see a weapon, and he will neutralize the threat. Keep your distance." For 10 tense minutes, a standoff took place in the pouring rain. Then an engine vibration shifted the gurney. A mournful whine from Baron cut through all the noise. He gently licked Dalton Rivers's face and nudged him, hoping for a response. The medics saw their chance and grabbed the gurney. "Move, now. Avoid looking at him." They rushed the stretcher toward the emergency room doors. This time Baron did not resist. He remained perfectly still on the gurney, a silent guardian for his partner. They passed under the glaring lights of Trauma Bay 1. The sliding doors closed, cutting off the storm's sound. An eerie silence fell over the room. The stretcher came to a halt in the middle of the room, circled by expensive equipment. Baron stood up. He shook the rain from his coat, spraying the sterile machines. He planted his paws at the four corners of the stretcher, creating a living shield for Dalton Rivers. He stared down the medical staff, dropped his head, and a growl rumbled like scraping steel. Everyone in the room was paralyzed. Hidden behind a supply cart in a corner stood the new nurse, Cassidy June. She was 24, with messy blonde hair and a constant look of concern. This was only her third week on the job. She was the nurse sent on coffee runs, the one Dr. Sterling always called too slow. Cassidy studied the dog carefully. She saw his tense muscles and dilated pupils. But then she saw one more thing. His front paw had a slight tremor. "He is afraid," she said softly. "Quiet, June," Sterling ordered without looking at her. "Security, get that animal out of here. I need to pronounce the time of death, and I will not do it with that creature present." 3 guards advanced with batons raised. Barron's reaction was a sharp crack. His powerful jaws snapped shut, inches from a guard's face, before he resumed his stance. "I am done with this," Sterling yelled, stepping back. "Everybody out. Get the police dog unit and animal control on the phone right now, and get me a tranquilizer rifle. If he makes another move, you are authorized to put him down." The team evacuated the room. The glass doors of the trauma bay shut, leaving the loyal dog and his partner alone as the clock was ticking. By 4 in the morning, this was no longer a hospital problem, but a matter of national security. The waiting area was crowded with police, kept at a distance by 2 men in black suits from a government vehicle. They identified themselves as Department of Defense and refused to speak with the press. The observation room for Trauma Bay 1 was filled with tension. Sterling paced anxiously, glancing at his watch every 30 seconds. "This is completely ridiculous," he grumbled, pointing at the bay. "There is a dead American hero in that room, and some animal has my whole hospital at a standstill." An agent named Miller calmly replied, "That is not an animal, Doctor. He is a specialized military asset. His training costs around $50,000. And to be perfectly clear, his official military rank is above yours." Sterling's face turned beet red. "He is a threat to my hospital, and he is blocking a procedure. I am authorizing the police to end this." On the floor below, Barron remained still. The dog seemed more settled, his big paws resting on Dalton's uniform. His adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep sorrow that made him tremble. If anyone walked past the glass, Barron's ears would twitch, and a low growl would echo through the barrier. Cassidy June was mopping the floor nearby, trying to remain unnoticed, but she could not take her eyes off the drama in the bay. She noticed the dog's panting, his saliva falling on the stained uniform. A powerful feeling of familiarity washed over her. She recognized that posture, the specific angle of his head. Brenda, the charge nurse, broke her focus. "Hey, are you with us? Stop daydreaming and grab some saline for Bay 4. Cassidy answered softly. "He is covering his 6. Brenda stopped short. "His what now?" Cassidy said again, gripping the mop. "His 6 o'clock. His back. He believes his partner is only wounded. He is on security detail. He will not move until his handler tells him to." Brenda gave Cassidy a look that was part pity, part irritation. "Look, sweetie, that man is not giving any more commands, and the police intend to put that dog down in 20 minutes. She was not wrong. The local SWAT commander, Captain Holloway, was now talking with Dr. Sterling. Miller told Holloway, "A tranquilizer is too risky. His heart rate is elevated. The shock could be fatal. If you miss, he will be through that glass before the sedative hits. That dog is a loaded gun." Holloway's response was cold and practical. "That leaves us with a live round as the only choice." "One single shot," Holloway said. "It is the only guaranteed way to secure the scene and recover the body." Miller made one last, soft protest. "He is a decorated war hero." Sterling interrupted. "He is a problem. This is a hospital, not a kennel. Proceed." The decision was final. Holloway nodded to a sniper who lifted his rifle. Cassidy's stomach sank. Her mop clattered to the floor, and the loud sound made every head turn. "Stop!" she cried out. Her voice trembled, but it was loud enough to hear. Dr. Sterling glared at her. "Nurse June, get back to work, or get out of my hospital." "You cannot shoot him," she insisted, her whole body shaking as she approached them. "He is only doing what he was trained to do." "He needs a command we cannot give, miss," Agent Miller said wearily. "His handler is gone. His unit is classified. A new trainer is at least 4 hours away. We have no other options." "I can get him to stand down," Cassidy announced. The room fell into absolute silence. Sterling let out a cruel, mocking laugh. "You? A fractured bone made you dizzy last week. How will you handle a military dog?" Cassidy's response was surprisingly firm. "I know, Baron. I understand the procedures." Brenda sneered. "You are nothing but a new nurse." Cassidy pleaded with Agent Miller. "Please, I just need 5 minutes. If I am unable to calm him, you can proceed. But please do not put down a hero for loving his handler." Miller glanced from the sniper to the nurse. He looked at his watch. "I will give you 3 minutes. Be aware, if he attacks, we will shoot through you. Do you understand?" Cassidy simply nodded and took a deep breath. She pressed the button, and the glass doors slid open with a hiss. The air smelled of blood, damp fur, and disinfectant. Baron immediately stood up. This time, however, he was completely silent. His ears were flat against his head, and his body was tense and still. He lowered his body, his muscles tight like a wound-up spring. Cassidy walked inside. The doors shut behind her, trapping her with the dog. Everyone stared through the glass in horror. Dr. Sterling shook his head. "She is going to be mauled," he commanded. "Get a trauma team ready for severe blood loss." Cassidy stopped about 10 feet away from the gurney. She deliberately avoided looking at the dog or the soldier. She kept her gaze fixed on the dog's paws. "Hello, friend," she whispered. Baron let out a terrifying roar that could make a heart stop. His jaws snapped together with a loud crack that echoed in the room. The dog got off the gurney, putting himself between her and Dalton. He was enormous up close. A light-coloured scar ran across his dark muzzle. Cassidy remained perfectly still. She angled her body sideways to appear smaller and less threatening. "Fuss," she said gently, using the German word for heel. The dog's ears twitched. He recognized the command, but decided to disobey. He moved closer, the hair along his spine standing up. He was now only 5 feet from her. It would only take 1 jump. "He is preparing to attack," Holloway said, motioning to the sniper. Cassidy could see the dog's muscles tense for the leap. She only had seconds. Talking was no longer an option. The dog was acting on grief and instinct alone. He needed a visual cue, something he could recognize. With extreme slowness, Cassidy raised her left arm. She was wearing a standard blue nurse's uniform. Her right hand moved toward the sleeve at her left shoulder. At her movement, Baron growled, revealing his teeth. He was prepared to bite her arm. Cassidy took hold of the sleeve and started to push it upward. She rolled it past her elbow, uncovering faint, old scars. She continued toward her shoulder. A tattoo was visible on her skin. It was not a flower or some other common design. It was a dark and complex symbol. It featured a broken spear, a lightning bolt, and a paw print. Underneath were the letters K9DH Unit 4. Baron stopped moving. The large dog tilted his head. His growling ceased, and he drew a quick, sharp breath. His angry eyes were now locked on the symbol. It was the official insignia of the Dark Horse K9 unit. This was a secret military operation that was not supposed to exist. Cassidy then used 2 fingers to tap the tattoo twice. She knelt down on the bloody floor, showing complete trust by making herself defenseless. "Baron," she said, her voice filled with a new quality that no one there recognized. "Baron, stand down. Your mission is over." The powerful dog started to shake. He looked at the soldier, then at the woman, and back at the tattoo. He took 1 slow step forward. He sniffed the air. Underneath the hospital scent, he detected something else. He detected the smell of gun oil. He detected pine needles from a place far away. He detected a memory. Baron made a quiet sound, a whimper that pained everyone who heard it. He walked directly to Cassidy. He pressed his head against her chest with such force that it stole her breath. Cassidy embraced the huge dog and cried into his fur. "I know," she whispered to him. "I know, my friend. I miss him too." Outside the room, Agent Miller took off his sunglasses. "Well, I will be," he said quietly. "She is not just any nurse." Dr. Stirling just stared, his mouth hanging open. "Who is she?" Miller turned to the shocked doctor. "With that emblem, she has to be his first trainer." The silence in Trauma Bay 1 was profound. The only sounds were the dog's steady breathing and the nurse's quiet sobs. Agent Miller gave the sniper a signal to stand down. He put his own weapon away and gestured to Dr. Stirling through the glass. "Stirling, go ahead and open the door. The threat has passed," Miller ordered, "and do it with great care." As the doors opened, a peculiar odour drifted into the hallway. It was a mix of wet dog and the sharp smell of a battlefield. "Nurse June?" Dr. Stirling asked. His normally confident voice was now just a soft whisper. He stepped cautiously into the room, keeping his eye on the dog. Cassidy paid him no mind. She was busy checking Baron for wounds, speaking quickly in a blend of German and Dutch, rustic lichen. "Good boy. Hold still. Allow me to check." Baron, the same animal who had fought off a SWAT team, was now resting against her. His eyes were partly closed, his long and stressful watch finally done. "Cassidy," Agent Miller said, walking in. He looked at the tattoo on her arm. "I have not seen a dark horse marking in 3 years. I believe that entire operation was terminated." Cassidy stood up with a tired sort of grace. She wiped her tears, leaving a smudge of dog drool on her face. In that moment she seemed much older. The gentle nurse was gone, replaced by a woman with a tough, resolute jawline. "They did not terminate it, Agent," she said, her voice now hoarse. "They buried it, and that is a completely different thing." A flash of understanding crossed Miller's face. "You are Cassidy June," he stated. "C.J., the well-known handler from Kandahar. You were in charge of the elite dog program." Dr. Stirling blinked in astonishment. He thought, "My nurse, who has trouble with the pharmacy computer." Cassidy glanced at the surgeon. "I understand how the system works, Doctor. I act like I do not, so people will leave me in peace. I came here to be invisible." She went over to the gurney. Her hand trembled as she touched the cold boot of Master Chief Dalton Rivers. "I failed him," she whispered, as a rush of memories came back to her. 3 years before, Cassidy June was not working in a Norfolk hospital. She was on a dusty military base in Jalalabad, wearing gear stained with sweat and dog treats. She was not a soldier, but something much harder to find. She was a specialist who could look at a puppy and tell if it could parachute from a plane at 20,000 feet. That is where she met Dalton Rivers. He was at the kennels, searching for a new partner. His former dog, Rex, had been killed by a roadside bomb. Dalton was angry and distrustful of the 21-year-old woman managing the program. "I require a weapon, not a companion," Dalton had sneered at the kennels. "Give me the most aggressive dog you have." "You do not want aggressive," Cassidy replied, not intimidated by his rank. "Aggressive will get you killed. Aggressive is just another word for scared. You need control. You need a switch to turn it on and off. She walked him to the final kennel, labelled Project Baron. Baron was a difficult case. He was too intelligent, too driven, and had been rejected by 3 other handlers. If a handler showed any doubt, Baron would take control. During a fight, that kind of independence could be deadly. He does not just blindly take orders, Cassidy explained as she unlatched the crate. Baron paid no attention to Dalton and sat beside Cassidy, watching a ball in her pocket. He needs a partner who can think more quickly than he does. Dalton knelt down. For a brief moment his stern look softened. He did not try to pet the dog. He just waited. Baron walked over, sniffed Dalton's neck, and then did something that amazed Cassidy. He lifted his paw and placed it right on Dalton's knee. "He has selected you," Cassidy said quietly. Over the next 6 months, Cassidy built the connection between the man and the dog. She taught them to sync their breathing. She showed Dalton how to read the slightest movement of Baron's ears. Cassidy trained Baron to only listen for the sound of Dalton's heartbeat during a mission. There in the dust and heat, the 3 of them worked as a single unit. A deep bond formed between Cassidy and Dalton. It was not a romance, but a friendship based on survival, mutual risk, and quiet talks under Afghan stars about the peaceful life they both wanted. One day, while stroking Baron, Dalton said to her, "When I am done here, I am taking him, and then I am coming to get you. We will start a kennel. No more combat. Is that a promise?" she had asked. He smiled and said, "On my honor." But then the Pesh Valley mission occurred. Cassidy was not there, but she heard every word on the radio from the base. She heard the ambush begin. She heard a tremendous explosion. After that, there was only silence. The official story said Dalton was flown out with severe injuries, but was alive. Baron was listed as lost in action, probably deceased. That information broke something inside Cassidy. She left the private security business. The memories were too painful. She relocated to Norfolk, Dalton's hometown, holding on to a slim hope of seeing him again. But they never met again. She learned he had immediately returned to active duty. She assumed he had either forgotten about her or held her responsible for losing his dog. So she became a nurse and chose a life of healing instead of harming. Back in the trauma bay, Cassidy composed herself. "He found him," she announced to the room, petting Baron's head. Dalton went back for his dog. He did not abandon him. He went to find Baron. That must be the reason he was still over there. She looked toward Agent Miller, hoping his expression would provide an answer. Miller slowly nodded. It was an unsanctioned mission, not approved by anyone. Master Chief Rivers had heard that a wild Malinois was causing trouble for the Taliban by leading a pack of stray dogs. So he used his personal leave time to retrieve his partner. "And he got him," Cassidy whispered, as tears finally began to fall down her cheeks. "He brought him home, but it cost him his life." Dr. Sterling cleared his throat. The room was thick with emotion, but he still had protocols to enforce. "Nurse June, I apologize. I mean Cassidy," Sterling said, fixing his error. "I am very sorry for your loss." "I understand. But we have a job to do. The medical examiner is coming. We need to prep the body. Can you please get the dog out of here?" Cassidy simply nodded. She inhaled deeply to calm herself and looked down at Baron. "Baron," she said with authority. "Vrij, free." It was his release command, the words that meant his duty was done. He could just be a dog again. But Baron remained still. He stood but would not leave the room. Instead, he turned and placed his front paws back on the gurney, resting them on Dalton's chest. He stared at Cassidy and let out a single, sharp bark. "Woof!" Cassidy was stunned. "I gave him the release command," she whispered. "He always obeys. The poor thing is probably just confused, Brenda offered from the doorway. Baron barked once more, this time with greater urgency. His eyes darted from Cassidy to Dalton's still face and back to Cassidy. He gently pushed Dalton's chest with his nose. Woof! Woof! A chilling wave of fear washed over Cassidy. She recognized every sound that dog made. She knew his bark for a threat, for playtime, and for a warning. This was his warning bark. It was the same signal he used when he located a survivor in a disaster area. "Doctor," Cassidy said, her voice shaking slightly, "get the crash cart." "What?" Sterling snapped, clearly irritated. "Nurse. He has been gone for 6 hours," the paramedics pronounced him. "His body is cold." "Get the cart," Cassidy commanded, her gaze so intense the guards beside her flinched. "The dog is alerting. He is signaling that he's found someone alive." "That is completely ridiculous," Sterling sneered. "His skin is pale. He is as cold as marble." "Baron is never mistaken," Cassidy stated with total conviction. She snatched a stethoscope from a wall hook. She did not bother asking for permission. She moved around the dog, who allowed her to pass while blocking everyone else, and put the earpieces in. She threw back the warm blanket covering the body. She pressed the head of the stethoscope against Dalton Rivers' still, scarred chest. A profound silence fell over the room. Cassidy shut her eyes, pressing down firmly, trying to hear anything beyond the hospital's low hum. Thump. The sound was incredibly faint, like a single drop of water far away. She remained focused. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Thump! Cassidy's eyes shot open. She looked at Dr. Sterling, her face now pale with shock. "He is alive," she whispered. "It is the Lazarus effect. His heart is beating incredibly slowly. It must be extreme hypothermia, maybe masked by some kind of drug." Sterling hurried to her side. "This cannot be possible." He grabbed the stethoscope to listen for himself. In that single instant, all of his professional pride vanished. "Code Blue!" Sterling shouted to the staff. "I have a heartbeat. It is faint, but it is present. I need epinephrine and warm saline. Get everything warm. We need to intubate. Let us move people now." The trauma room erupted into controlled chaos. This was nothing like the usual calm urgency of a hospital. It felt more like a combat zone. "I need femoral line access," Sterling yelled. "Nurse," cut off his pants, "put a warming blanket on him." "We can't get close to him," yelled Rick, the paramedic. He tried to approach with defibrillator pads, but Baron growled and snapped at him. The dog was overwhelmed. The noise and sudden movements toward his handler felt like another attack. He lunged, and his teeth snagged the sleeve of a doctor's lab coat. "Someone remove that dog from this room," Sterling commanded. "I cannot work with that animal here." "No!" Cassidy yelled back at him. She was multitasking, setting up an intravenous line while gripping Baron's collar. "If he leaves, he will tear down the door. He knows Dalton is in here." "Well, you better control him, June, or I swear I will have him put down myself." Cassidy instantly dropped to her knees by the gurney, right in the middle of all the frantic work. She held Baron's face between her hands, making the dog look directly at her. "Baron, Platz, Blil." The dog was shaking with fear, his eyes locked on the team working on Dalton. "Look at me," Cassidy urged, her face only inches from the dog's strong jaws. "They are trying to help him. They are helping." She took Baron's paw and placed it on her own chest, over her heart, then moved it to Dalton's arm. "Friend," she said quietly. "Pack." Baron whimpered softly, but finally sat down. He settled himself near the gurney's wheels, tucking his body underneath it. He became perfectly still, almost like a statue, his eyes fixed on the heart monitor's flat green line. "All right, he is out of the way," Cassidy said. "Go." For the following hour, Cassidy June was more than just a nurse. She was a bridge. She kept one hand deep in the dog's thick fur while using the other to pass instruments to Dr. Sterling. His internal temperature is 82 degrees, Brenda reported. He is hypothermic. Administering one of epinephrine, a resident announced. No change on the monitor. Come on, Dalton, Cassidy whispered, glancing at the still, pale face of the man they found in the desert. You did not make it through all that just to die here in Norfolk. You need to fight. From his spot under the gurney, Barron started to howl. It was not a loud sound. It was a deep, steady, and strangely melodic noise. He was calling out to his handler. "What is that noise?" Sterling asked, with beads of sweat on his brow. "He is calling him back," Cassidy replied. "Just keep working." And then a single beep came from the monitor. A weak, unsteady green spike appeared. "Beep, beep, we have a rhythm," Brenda exclaimed with relief. "Sinus bradycardia." "It's getting stronger. His pressure is coming up," the anesthesiologist reported. 80 over 40. Now it is 90 over 50. Dalton's chest rose and fell with a single, shallow breath. A small cloud of condensation formed in the breathing tube. "He has returned," Sterling said, letting his hands drop with an exhausted sigh of relief. "My goodness, he has returned." The room erupted in cheers and emotional sobs. Nurses started to embrace one another. Even Agent Miller, the quiet man in the corner, wiped a single tear from his eye. But Cassidy did not join the celebration. She slid down the wall and onto the floor, completely spent. Barron emerged from under the gurney. He did not go to Dalton, he walked directly to Cassidy. He began licking the tears from her face, his tail making a soft thumping sound against the cabinets. And this is where the story ends. 2 days later, Dalton Rivers was in stable condition. He was recovering in the intensive care unit, warm and bandaged, slowly regaining consciousness. The story became a local sensation. It was about the dog who stood watch over a ghost and the nurse who believed in him. Cassidy was reading by his bed while Barron slept on the floor. The hospital had made an unusual exception for the animal. He was now classified as an official therapy dog. Dalton let out a soft groan. His eyes fluttered open. He blinked, adjusting to the sterile, bright room. He noticed the dog first, and then he saw the woman sitting next to him. "Cass," he said, his voice raspy and faint. "Hey there, soldier," she replied with a warm smile, setting her book aside. "You certainly took your time waking up." "I had to go get him," Dalton whispered. "I had to honor a promise." "I know you did," she said, gently taking his hand. Dalton managed a weak squeeze of her fingers. His eyes moved from Barron to her, his expression turning serious. "Cassidy," he started, as his heart rate increased on the monitor. "Barron was not protecting me." Cassidy seemed confused. "What are you talking about?" "Of course he was. He never left your side for 6 whole hours." "No," Dalton said through a pained breath, trying to adjust his position. "You have to understand. In the helicopter, just before I passed out, I hid something in his vest." "What did you put in his vest?" "The intel," Dalton said weakly. "The real reason our chopper went down." "Why, my team left me behind. It was not a rescue, Cass. It was a mission to eliminate us." Cassidy froze in place. The air in the warm hospital room suddenly felt freezing cold. "Dalton, what are you telling me?" "I am telling you," Dalton whispered, his eyes fixed on the door, "that the men who shot me were on our team, and I think one of them is in this hospital right now, waiting for visiting hours to start." Cassidy looked down at Barron. The dog was now fully awake. He was not looking at Dalton. His gaze was locked on the door to the room, and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound that matched the frantic pounding in Cassidy's own chest. Dalton's words hung in the air like a thick poison. A silencing mission. She stood up, her hands beginning to shake. She noticed the heavy tactical harness Baron was still wearing. The hospital staff had tried to remove it, but the dog would snarl each time they got close. Now she understood why. He was not just protecting his owner, he was guarding the truth. "Where is the proof?" Cassidy whispered, kneeling beside the dog. Dalton raised a shaky finger. "It is in the left shoulder pad, hidden deep inside the lining. You will need to cut it out." Cassidy took the trauma shears from her pocket, the same pair she used in emergencies. She felt along the inside of Baron's thick harness. She found it. A tiny, hard rectangle, no bigger than her smallest fingernail, was sewn into the padding. She slid the shears into the fabric and made one quick snip. A small memory card dropped into her open hand. "I have it," she thought to herself. "Hide it," Dalton urged in a faint voice, his eyes glued to the doorknob. "And if Miller is the one who comes in, you run." The handle began to turn. Cassidy had no time to escape. She quickly pushed the card into her scrub cap, hiding it deep within her hair bun. She turned just as the door opened, revealing Agent Miller. He stood alone. His suit jacket was gone, and his sleeves were rolled high. He looked completely calm and professional, which somehow made him seem incredibly dangerous. "Agent Miller," she said, "Dr. Sterling told us our patient was awake." "That is a true miracle," Miller replied with a cold smile. "He is still extremely weak," Cassidy stammered, moving to block the way between Miller and the bed. Baron got to his feet, a low growl starting deep in his chest. It was not a warning. It was the sound of a predator preparing to strike. "I am sure he is," Miller said, stepping inside and shutting the door. He turned the lock. The click sounded as loud as a gunshot in the quiet room. "I require his official statement right now. The regulations say I have to do this by myself. You can wait outside in the hall." "I am absolutely not leaving his side," Cassidy stated, standing her ground. "His vital signs are not stable." "Your hospital rules are meaningless to me." Miller's voice became much colder. He reached down toward his leg. He was not reaching for a badge. He pulled out a syringe. "And I truly do not mind if there is a witness." Dalton tried to push himself up, but his body was too broken. "Miller, do not do this. The files were already sent." "That was a nice try, Ghost," Miller scoffed, pulling the cap from the needle. "We blocked every signal out of that valley. Nothing was transmitted. You died in an accident, a true tragedy. And this dog, well, we will have to put him down for attacking a staff member. Another terrible accident." Miller moved forward, raising the syringe. It was not filled with medicine. It held a clear fluid, potassium chloride, enough to make a heart stop beating. "No!" Cassidy yelled. She grabbed the nearest thing, a metal tray, and threw it at Miller with all her might. It hit his shoulder, but did not slow him down at all. Miller let out a short, cold laugh. He lunged for Dalton's intravenous line, trying to inject the poison into the port. But he made a single, massive mistake. He had completely forgotten about the Belgian Malinois. "Baron, get him! Attack!" Dalton yelled the order, using every bit of strength he had left. Baron did not need the command. He had been waiting for 6 hours for this very chance to release his rage. The dog flew from the end of the bed. He was a blur of dark fur and fury. He did not aim for the arm. He aimed directly for the chest. 80 pounds of pure muscle crashed into Miller like a cannonball, sending him flying backward into a medical cart. Trays of tools, vials of drugs, and fluid bags flew everywhere with a tremendous crash of glass. Miller screamed as Baron's teeth bit down hard on his forearm, the one with the syringe. The sound of bone snapping was clear above the noise. The syringe was flung across the room, but Miller was a highly trained agent. He was a dirty government operative. With his good hand he reached for a hidden holster near his ankle. It held a very small handgun. "Cassidy! The gun!" Dalton shouted, Miller threw a hard kick into the dog's ribs. Barron yelped in pain, but refused to let go. He shook his head back and forth, tearing through the man's sleeve and the muscle underneath. Miller brought the handgun up, aiming it right at the dog's head. Cassidy did not hesitate. There was no time to think. She simply acted. She spotted the defibrillator on the wall. She ripped the 2 paddles from the unit. They were always kept charged and ready. "Clear!" she shouted from pure instinct. She was not going to use them to save a life. She lunged forward and pressed both paddles onto Agent Miller's neck as he squeezed the trigger. Bang! The gun went off and the bullet smashed through the window. Zap! 200 joules of electricity surged through Agent Miller. His whole body locked up tight. His eyes rolled into the back of his head. He shook violently as the gun dropped from his fingers. Barron let go as the man collapsed to the floor, still twitching. The room was suddenly silent, except for the dog's panting and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Security guards crashed through the broken door a moment later, with their guns raised. "Drop your weapon! Drop it right now!" Cassidy just stood there, holding the defibrillator paddles like clubs, fighting to catch her breath. Miller's blood was spattered across her white uniform. Barron stood guard over the agent on the floor. "He tried to kill him," Cassidy gasped, pointing a paddle at Miller. "Check what is in his pockets. And check that syringe." Captain Halloway pushed through the guards. He saw the whole scene, the agent on the ground, the brave dog, and the young nurse holding the paddles. He noticed the bullet hole. He bent over and picked up the syringe Miller had lost. He sniffed the tip of the needle. "Potassium," Halloway whispered to himself. He looked up at Cassidy. "You saved us all a lot of paperwork, nurse." Dalton settled back against his pillows, a small smile on his face. "That," he said softly, "is one hell of a nurse." 6 months later, the quiet of the Shenandoah Valley was much different from the quiet of that hospital room. It was not the tense silence that comes right before the end. It was a calm silence, full of the sounds of the wind, a faraway tractor, and a dog's paws on the ground. The sign that hung from the gate was new, but the wood was old, with burnt edges that gave it a rustic look. Carved into the oak were the words, "Dark Horse Sanctuary, a healing place for the broken and the brave." Cassidy June stood on the porch of the big farmhouse, wiping her hands on a cloth. She was not wearing her nurse's scrubs any more. She wore comfortable jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The tattoo on her shoulder, a broken spear crossed by a lightning bolt, was showing. It had become a sign of her own strength, shining in the Virginia sunlight. She leaned on the railing, watching the dogs in the 3-acre field below. To a stranger, it might have seemed like total chaos. To Cassidy, it was a perfectly running system of healing. There were about a dozen dogs out in the field. None of them were just regular pets. There was a German shepherd with a metal leg who survived a drug bust in Mexico, a jumpy Dutch shepherd with many scars who retired from police work because of a fear of loud sounds, and a blind Labrador who lost his sight while looking for bombs. These were the heroes that people forgot, the dogs who were used and then thrown away. But standing right in the middle of them all, like a strong anchor, was Barron. The Belgian Malinois was a different dog. His combat vest was gone, and he now wore a simple leather collar. His fur, which was once caked with mud, now shined like dark steel. He walked with a sure, almost noble presence among the other dogs. He could end a small fight with just a look, and would softly push the blind lab away from the fence. He was the leader of this group, but he did not lead them with fear. He led them with his own story of survival. The screen door creaked open behind Cassidy. A heavy boot stepped on the porch, followed by the quiet tap of a cane. A deep voice said, "You are watching him again." Cassidy smiled, but kept looking at the field. "Just making sure our new guy does not figure out how to take apart the tractor." Dalton Rivers came onto the porch, looking thinner and stronger than he did in the hospital. He walked with a small limp, a constant reminder of the day he almost lost his leg. But he was walking. He carried 2 hot cups of coffee and passed one to Cassidy. He leaned on the railing beside her, taking the pressure off his bad leg. "He still thinks about it," Dalton said softly, as he watched Baron follow a hawk flying high above. "He misses the job, the sense of duty. You can take the dog out of the war, but you cannot take the war out of the dog." Cassidy blew on her hot coffee. "He is not on a mission now, Dalton. He is on watch. He knows this is his new territory to protect." Dalton drank his coffee, its heat a small comfort. "I know that feeling all too well. The last 6 months had been a chapter neither of them ever saw coming. What happened in that Norfolk hospital created a chain reaction that went all the way to the top of the Pentagon. The computer chip Dalton had hidden in Baron's vest was not just mission information, it was hard proof of a secret weapons smuggling ring led by Agent Miller's rogue unit. The consequences were huge. A whirlwind of government investigations, courtroom sessions, and news reports came next. Dalton and Cassidy were pushed into the public eye. She was called the Angel with the Lightning Tattoo, and he was the ghost who came back to life. They wanted nothing to do with being famous. The same day Dalton got his honourable discharge and a Purple Heart, he tucked the medal away in a drawer. They took his military pension and her life savings to buy this farm. They had disappeared once again, but this time it was their choice. "They gave Miller his sentence today," Dalton said, his voice cutting through the morning calm. He stared at the trees in the distance, not looking at her. A shiver went down Cassidy's spine. "That is why the television has been off. He received life with no chance for parole," Dalton went on. "They are sending him to Leavenworth." He escaped a death sentence by giving up his entire network. "Good," Cassidy replied, her voice firm and cold. She glanced at the pale scar on her arm where Miller had once grabbed her. "I hope he lives a very long and unhappy life." "He will," Dalton said, clearing his throat and shifting his feet. "By the way, the Pentagon called me again." Cassidy turned toward him, her eyebrows raised in a question. "Let me guess," she said. "They want a photo with Baron, or they want you advising them on new training." "They asked for both," Dalton answered with a bitter little laugh. "And they want to give Baron the Dickin Medal. It is the animal equivalent of the Medal of Honor. They want a huge ceremony in Washington, D.C., a complete media spectacle." "What did you say to them?" Dalton's eyes moved toward the dogs. Baron was not moving any more. He stood totally still, his nose high, sensing the wind coming from the hills. He looked magnificent, a perfect portrait of instinct and devotion. "I told them no," Dalton said quietly. A true smile brightened Cassidy's face, forming tiny lines near her eyes. "What was your reason?" "Because he does not need a medal," Dalton replied, his voice heavy with feeling. "A medal is only a symbol for people. It lets them feel better after putting dogs in danger. Baron does not care about a shiny piece of metal. He cares about his family. He cares about his duty." Dalton turned back to Cassidy and took her hand in his. "Besides," Dalton added in a low voice, "he already has the greatest prize. He has us. He is home." Cassidy gently squeezed his hand. "We are all home." At that moment, a loud crack from the road broke the peace as a truck backfired. The entire feeling of the moment changed instantly. The other dogs cried out and ran in fear. The blind Labrador stumbled in circles, whimpering. Baron did not run. He immediately went into a protective stance. The fur on his back stood up as he bared his teeth. He placed his body between the farm's entrance and the other animals. Then he released the deep threatening growl that had once stopped an entire SWAT team in its tracks. On the porch, Dalton tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that was not there. Cassidy felt her own heart hammering inside her chest. Then, just as fast, it ended. The sound of the truck disappeared into the distance. Baron stayed in his position for 10 more seconds, searching the area with his eyes. Finally, he looked toward the porch and met Dalton's gaze. Dalton gave a small, almost unseen nod. "Stand down," he whispered. Baron exhaled deeply. He got up, shook his entire body to release the tension, and walked to the blind dog, giving it a comforting touch with his nose. "Are you seeing this?" Cassidy whispered, her eyes starting to fill with tears. "He is still on guard for us." Dalton gazed at the woman who had saved him, not with doctors, but with simple courage. He saw the tattoo on her arm that had miraculously deflected a bullet. He then looked down at the cane he needed to walk. "We are a pair of broken things, are we not, Cass?" he asked softly. Cassidy moved closer, wrapping her arms around his middle. She rested her head on his chest, feeling the powerful, constant beat of a heart that had once stopped. "We are not broken, Ghost," she said, her voice a firm whisper. "We have been repaired. That is the concept of kintsugi. The gold that mends the cracks makes the item stronger and more beautiful." Dalton kissed the crown of her head. "You and your wonderful stories." She gave a small laugh. "This particular one is true." Baron left the other dogs and came toward the porch. They could hear the faint click of his nails on the wooden stairs. He walked straight past his water dish. He did not settle in his normal spot. Instead, he laid down directly between them and the path. He faced away from them, a silent protector shielding them from the outside world. He rested his head on his paws, but his ears were turned back, listening to the sound of their breathing. Dalton sat on the porch swing, guiding Cassidy to sit with him. The setting sun coloured the sky with orange and purple, shades that made him think of Afghanistan, but this time without the dread. "Hey, Baron," Dalton said in a soft voice. The dog's ear moved slightly in acknowledgement. "Your shift is over, my friend," Dalton told him. "You are now officially relieved from your duties." Baron raised his head, looking from Dalton to Cassidy. He let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to make the porch vibrate slightly. He remained exactly where he was, but his eyelids started to get heavy. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, the soldier was at peace. The protector was finally relaxed, watching over the only family he had ever truly wanted. Baron and Dalton showed everyone that the link between a handler and his dog is not about giving orders. It is a spiritual connection that exists beyond commands, regulations, and even life itself. In that hospital room, Cassidy June did something more than save a single life. She saved a team. She reminded all of us that the most powerful medicine can sometimes be fierce devotion. Here, at Dark Horse Sanctuary, our mission goes on. We do not fight wars anymore, but we do help heal the warriors who have returned. If this story moved you, we have a new task for you. We ask that you press that like button. Do not do it for a machine. Do it to honor the service animals who keep watch over us while we rest safely in our beds. Please subscribe and activate your notifications. We have many more amazing true stories of bravery and hope to bring you every single week. And I am very excited to read what you think in the comments section down below. Do you think that dogs possess some kind of special sense? Has an animal ever guarded you when you felt you might be in danger? We would feel truly privileged if you shared your own experience with our community. Until we share our next story, please be safe, embrace your loved ones, and we thank you for watching. They had disappeared once again, but this time it was their choice. They gave Miller his sentence today, Dalton said, his voice cutting through the morning calm. He stared at the trees in the distance, not looking at her. A shiver went down Cassidy's spine. That is why the television has been off. He received life with no chance for parole, Dalton went on. They are sending him to Leavenworth. He escaped a death sentence by giving up his entire network. Good, Cassidy replied, her voice firm and cold. She glanced at the pale scar on her arm where Miller had once grabbed her. "I hope he lives a very long and unhappy life." "He will," Dalton said, clearing his throat and shifting his feet. "By the way, the Pentagon called me again." Cassidy turned toward him, her eyebrows raised in a question. "Let me guess," she said. "They want a photo with Baron, or they want you advising them on new training?" "They asked for both," Dalton answered with a bitter little laugh. "And they want to give Baron the Dickin Medal. It is the animal equivalent of the Medal of Honor. They want a huge ceremony in Washington, D.C., a complete media spectacle." "What did you say to them?" Dalton's eyes moved toward the dogs. Baron was not moving any more. He stood totally still, his nose high, sensing the wind coming from the hills. He looked magnificent, a perfect portrait of instinct and devotion. "I told them no," Dalton said quietly. A true smile brightened Cassidy's face, forming tiny lines near her eyes. "What was your reason?" "Because he does not need a medal," Dalton replied, his voice heavy with feeling. "A medal is only a symbol for people. It lets them feel better after putting dogs in danger. Baron does not care about a shiny piece of metal. He cares about his family. He cares about his duty." Dalton turned back to Cassidy and took her hand in his. "Besides," Dalton added in a low voice, "he already has the greatest prize. He has us. He is home." Cassidy gently squeezed his hand. "We are all home." At that moment, a loud crack from the road broke the peace as a truck backfired. The entire feeling of the moment changed instantly. The other dogs cried out and ran in fear. The blind Labrador stumbled in circles, whimpering. Baron did not run. He immediately went into a protective stance. The fur on his back stood up as he bared his teeth. He placed his body between the farm's entrance and the other animals. Then he released the deep, threatening growl that had once stopped an entire SWAT team in its tracks. On the porch, Dalton tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that was not there. Cassidy felt her own heart hammering inside her chest. Then, just as fast, it ended. The sound of the truck disappeared into the distance. Baron stayed in his position for 10 more seconds, searching the area with his eyes. Finally, he looked toward the porch and met Dalton's gaze. Dalton gave a small, almost unseen nod. "Stand down," he whispered. Baron exhaled deeply. He got up, shook his entire body to release the tension, and walked to the blind dog, giving it a comforting touch with his nose. "Are you seeing this?" Cassidy whispered, her eyes starting to fill with tears. "He is still on guard for us." Dalton gazed at the woman who had saved him, not with doctors, but with simple courage. He saw the tattoo on her arm that had miraculously deflected a bullet. He then looked down at the cane he needed to walk. "We are a pair of broken things, are we not, Cass?" he asked softly. Cassidy moved closer, wrapping her arms around his middle. She rested her head on his chest, feeling the powerful, constant beat of a heart that had once stopped. "We are not broken, Ghost," she said, her voice a firm whisper. "We have been repaired. That is the concept of kintsugi. The gold that mends the cracks makes the item stronger and more beautiful." Dalton kissed the crown of her head. "You and your wonderful stories." She gave a small laugh. "This particular one is true." Baron left the other dogs and came toward the porch. They could hear the faint click of his nails on the wooden stairs. He walked straight past his water dish. He did not settle in his normal spot. Instead, he laid down directly between them and the path. He faced away from them, a silent protector shielding them from the outside world. He rested his head on his paws, but his ears were turned back, listening to the sound of their breathing. Dalton sat on the porch swing, guiding Cassidy to sit with him. The setting sun coloured the sky with orange and purple, shades that made him think of Afghanistan, but this time without the dread. "Hey, Baron," Dalton said in a soft voice. The dog's ear moved slightly in acknowledgment. "Your shift is over, my friend." Dalton told him. "You are now officially relieved from your duties." Baron raised his head, looking from Dalton to Cassidy. He let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to make the porch vibrate slightly. He remained exactly where he was, but his eyelids started to get heavy. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, the soldier was at peace. The protector was finally relaxed, watching over the only family he had ever truly wanted. Baron and Dalton showed everyone that the link between a handler and his dog is not about giving orders. It is a spiritual connection that exists beyond commands, regulations, and even life itself. In that hospital room, Cassidy June did something more than save a single life. She saved a team. She reminded all of us that the most powerful medicine can sometimes be fierce devotion. Here, at Dark Horse Sanctuary, our mission goes on. We do not fight wars anymore, but we do help heal the warriors who have returned. If this story moved you, we have a new task for you. We ask that you press that like button. Do not do it for a machine. Do it to honor the service animals who keep watch over us while we rest safely in our beds. Please subscribe and activate your notifications. We have many more amazing true stories of bravery and hope to bring you every single week. And I am very excited to read what you think in the comments section down below. Do you think that dogs possess some kind of special sense? Has an animal ever guarded you when you felt you might be in danger? We would feel truly privileged if you shared your own experience with our community. Until we share our next story, please be safe, embrace your loved ones, and we thank you for watching.